Welcome to the historical and generational effects of policing. Please take a minute and read the quote by Dr. John Henrik Clark. It is important we can find ourselves on the map of human geography. As peace officers, it is incumbent upon us to understand the historical effects of policing and how it affects police legitimacy. Understand history's impact on communities with historically low levels of trust, and what law enforcement and members of the community can do to build trust. People sometimes view the police as the enemy of the people. But how did that opinion occur? What's the reason behind this perception? Policing is an honorable profession, but in the past it has sometimes been used in dishonorable ways. My name is John Satterfield, and I'm with the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. I'm going to walk you through some history, some not so distant, in an effort to illustrate how police have been used in dishonorable ways. This history may not be easy, but it's important for us to recognize this history continues to influence how some within communities of color view the police today. All four of these photos highlight the abuses by law enforcement during the Civil Rights Movement. Top left, Jackson, Mississippi, 1965. A white policeman rips an American flag away from an African American boy. Top right, Atlanta, Georgia, 1963. High school student is arrested. Bottom right, Freedom Summer, 1964. Man crouches on ground as state police strike him with batons following a failed sit-in. Bottom left, Birmingham, Alabama, 1963. 17-year-old civil rights demonstrator is attacked by police dogs during a protest. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 allowed a person to be hunted down by law enforcement because of the color of their skin. This is an example of a person being treated as a piece of property because of their skin color. Convict lease programs occurred between 1865 and 1928. Convict lease programs are an example of a criminal justice system that allowed a person of color to be treated as property. States leased prisoner labor to private parties such as plantations or companies due to discriminatory law enforcement practices and sentencing. African American men made up the vast majority of convicts in the South. Convict lease programs expanded throughout the South following the end of the Civil War and emancipation of slaves. Many of these convicts were never returned to freedom. In effect, convict lease programs allowed for legal slavery. The Tulsa Race Riot of 1921 was one of the worst race riots in the history of the United States. Tulsa, Oklahoma was segregated, with the black community of Greenwood thriving economically. A fabricated story of a black man assaulting a white woman inflamed existing racial and economic tension. During the riot, a mob of hundreds of white residents attacked the black community of Greenwood. Approximately 300 people, mostly blacks, were killed. An estimated 10,000 people were left homeless, and businesses, homes, and schools in Greenwood were destroyed. In 2001, a state-appointed commission concluded that the city of Tulsa had conspired with the mob to withhold aid to the black residents of Greenwood. In 2013, the chief of police for Tulsa, Chief Chuck Jordan, apologized for his agency's inaction during the 1921 riot. He said, quote, "I cannot apologize for the actions inaction, and dereliction that those individual officers and their chief exhibited during that dark time. But as your chief today, I can apologize for our police department. I am sorry and distressed that the Tulsa Police Department did not protect its citizens during those tragic days in 1921. The edict on the left is from a city council in California. The photo on the right is from a hotel door in Stockton, California in 1930. And it says, "No Filipinos allowed." The Jim Crow laws ran from 1876 to 1965. Jim Crow laws were the term given to state and local laws that were enacted to enforce racial segregation in the South. The photo in the bottom right corner, notice that it lists dogs, Negroes, and Mexicans all on one side. This dehumanizes a person based on the color of their skin and race. Human beings are listed next to an animal. The Jim Crow laws were based on race, and the laws were enforced by law enforcement. People that grew up under these laws are still alive today. Much of today's anger and mistrust is because of a system that law enforcement helped perpetuate, a system that discriminated against people of color. Reuben Stacy was lynched in Oklahoma in 1835 with police assistance and encouragement. Michael Donald is a recent example of this killing continuing. In 1981, Michael Donald was kidnapped and murdered by two KKK members in Mobile, Alabama. Donald's mother brought a wrongful death suit against the KKK and was awarded $7 million, which bankrupted the organization. The internment of Japanese Americans occurred during World War II. It was the forced relocation of over 100,000 people of Japanese ancestry. It was ordered by then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt with Executive Order 9066 and was carried out by the military and local law enforcement. On the left, a law enforcement officer takes property from Japanese Americans who are being interned. On the right, Japanese Americans arrive at an internment camp in Lodi, California. The Zoot Suit riots were a series of racial attacks against Mexican American youth by white U.S. servicemen in Los Angeles, California in 1963. Racial hostility toward Mexican Americans and racially inflammatory media propaganda drove fears of delinquency and lawlessness among Mexican Americans in World War II. The zoot suits worn by Mexican American men were seen as unpatriotic because of wartime clothing rations and made them easy targets for bands of white servicemen. Many young Mexican American men were attacked while law enforcement stood by and watched. LA's mayor maintained that racial prejudice was not a factor in the attacks. In Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white passenger and was arrested. Her actions and arrest sparked the Montgomery bus boycott. Rosa Parks was arrested by law enforcement for protesting against segregation. Again, law enforcement is being used to enforce laws that discriminate based on the color of someone's skin. It is this history that creates mistrust of law enforcement and the criminal justice system. Emmett Till was a 14-year-old African-American teenager who was lynched for allegedly flirting with a white woman. Till was kidnapped from his home by the woman's husband and her brother. Till was beaten and mutilated before being shot. His body was dumped into the river. It was weighed down with the fan blade of a cotton gin. His murderers were acquitted by an all-white jury after 67 minutes of deliberation. One juror commented, quote, "If we hadn't stopped to drink pop, it wouldn't have taken even that long," end quote. Protected against double jeopardy, they later admitted to the killing in a magazine interview. This is yet another example of the criminal justice system failing a person of color. This history becomes part of today's narrative of a system that has failed people of color. The picture on the left is of the first 4 black police officers to graduate from the Fort Worth Police Academy in 1953. The picture on the right is of the Greensboro 4. The 4 men who sat at a Woolworth's whites-only lunch counter in 1960 and were refused service because they were black. The men on the left were charged with serving and protecting a community, but it wasn't until 7 years later before they could actually sit at a counter with a white person. On March 7, 1965, approximately 600 people crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in an attempt to begin the Selma to Montgomery Civil Rights March. State troopers violently attacked the peaceful demonstrators in an attempt to stop the march for voting rights. The picture on the left depicts future U.S. Congressman John Lewis being beaten by police for peacefully demonstrating. The picture on the right depicts the same bridge 50 years later. Operation Wetback was an immigration law enforcement initiative that was created in 1954 to deal with illegal entry of Mexican citizens into the United States. Law enforcement was used to locate, process, and deport undocumented Mexicans. Tactics were often brutal, and many Mexicans were subjected to civil rights violations before being deported. In 1954, there were over 1 million illegal immigrants deported back to Mexico. The Little Rock Nine were 9 black students who enrolled in Little Rock's previously all-white Central High School. In September 1957, Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus deployed the Arkansas National Guard to Central High School to support segregationists in barring the Little Rock Nine from entering the school. The students were not allowed to enter until President Dwight D. Eisenhower nationalized the Arkansas National Guard and deployed the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army to escort and protect the students. In the photo on the left, Governor Faubus blocked the doors of the high school. You can see the Confederate flag. For many, the flag is a symbol of the segregated South, violence, and hate. In the photo on the top right, Elizabeth Eckford, one of the Little Rock Nine, is pursued by a mob as she tries to enter the school. Look at the anger from the white girl behind her. The photo on the bottom is of a former New Jersey SWAT lieutenant wearing a Confederate hat during a goodwill trip to Louisiana after Hurricane Katrina. Even though the civil rights movement took place in the 1960s, the actions of law enforcement today can easily trigger memories of how law enforcement has been used to enforce racist laws or was complicit in perpetuating racial injustice historically. Actions of law enforcement today may make some communities think that not much has changed from 50 years ago. In his 1963 inauguration speech, Alabama Governor George Wallace promised his white followers, quote, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. In June 1963, Governor Wallace used the Alabama National Guard to block the entry of 2 black students to the University of Alabama. Wallace himself stood in the doorway of the auditorium known as the Stand in the Schoolhouse Door. Again, law enforcement is used to enforce discriminatory laws. There are many people who believe that law enforcement is infected with racist white officers. The photo on the left is from a KKK rally in the 1960s. The photo in the center is of a former New Jersey SWAT lieutenant pretending to be a KKK member. The photo on the right is a law enforcement officer posing in his Klan robes. The picture on the right is from 2014. These images harm all members of law enforcement. They paint the picture that law enforcement is filled with racist white officers who are KKK members, which further perpetuates the false narrative. The photo on the left is from a Klan demonstration in 1992 where a white female child wanders up to a black law enforcement officer. Look at the expression on his face. The photo on the right is from a 2015 Baltimore protest following Freddie Gray's death. A black boy is offering water to white officers in riot gear. These children are part of the 94 to 97% of the community that we serve. How do we battle cynicism so that we can serve these community members with trust and respect? How can we play a role in shaping how they understand law enforcement? The Stonewall riots began after NYPD raided the Stonewall Inn, a nightclub that catered to the LGBT community in 1969. The raid sparked demonstrations by members of the LGBT community to protest the treatment of the gay community. In 2016, President Barack Obama declared the Stonewall Inn a national monument to the LGBT movement. The photograph on the left is a white law enforcement officer beating a black man during a civil rights protest. The photograph on the right is a Stockton Police Department officer using lawful and legitimate force. At the time this photo was taken, the media thought they had a case of police brutality. Because of our history, the perception and appearance of force still affects people today. Possibly resulting from a lack of trust that formed due to negative perceptions of police and their legitimacy, people don't always see the truth. What the media did not see was the suspect trying to take the officer's gun. A cell phone video was found later showing what had happened from a different angle. When both photo and video are combined, you have the lawful and legitimate use of force. In 1991, Rodney King was beaten by a group of LAPD officers following a high-speed chase. A witness videotaped much of the beating, and the footage was aired around the world. Although we have been going through history, instances of police abuse still occur today. While we are better trained, there are still those in law enforcement that violate trust by abuse. The Los Angeles riots, also known as the Rodney King riots, were a series of riots, lootings, arsons, and civil disturbances that occurred in Los Angeles County, California, in April and May 1992. The unrest began when a jury acquitted 4 LAPD officers of the use of excessive force in the videotaped arrest and beating of Rodney King. The rioting spread throughout Los Angeles and the surrounding metropolitan area as thousands of people rioted over a 6-day period following the announcement of the verdict. Widespread looting, assault, arson, and killings occurred during the riots, and estimates of property damage were over $1 billion. In total, 58 people were killed during the riots, more than 2,000 people were injured, and more than 11,000 were arrested. Abner Louima is a Haitian immigrant who was beaten and forcibly sodomized with a broomstick by NYPD officers in 1997. This is another example of police abuse against a person of color. The Rampart scandal was a scandal in the late 1990s that involved officers from anti-gang units of the LAPD Rampart Division. Over 70 officers were implicated in some form of misconduct, including shootings, beatings, planning of false evidence, perjury, stealing, and dealing in narcotics and bank robbery. It is one of the most widespread cases of police corruption in U.S. history. In 2015, the North Miami Police Department was found using mugshots of black men for sniper practice at a firing range. Think back to the Bloodhound Law, which legalized the hunting of people of color. Recall the video from the St. Landry Parish where the captain says he will hunt down people. These images continue to portray African Americans as less than human and less deserving of respect and dignity. The picture on the left is of Medgar Evers. He was a civil rights activist from Mississippi. He was assassinated by a KKK member in 1963. 2 trials with all-white juries ended with hung juries. His murderer was not convicted until 1994. Medgar Evers is famous for saying, quote, "You can kill a man, but you can't kill an idea." The picture on the right is of Martin Luther King. He was assassinated in 1968 while in Memphis, Tennessee, to support black sanitation workers. Although he has many famous quotes, this one is particularly relevant to us. Quote, "If I cannot do great things, I can do small things in a great way." Officer Montrell Jackson was one of 3 law enforcement officers murdered in the line of duty in Baton Rouge, Louisiana in July of 2016. This is a partial quote from a message that he posted on Facebook following the murder of 5 Dallas Police Department officers. He posted it just days before he was killed. Quote, "I personally want to send prayers out to everyone directly affected by this tragedy. These are trying times. Please don't let hate infect your heart. This city must and will get better. I'm working in these streets, so any protesters, officers, friends, family, or whoever, if you see me and need a hug or want to say a prayer, I got you." End quote. Photograph in the top left are the Dallas police officers who were murdered in July 2016 during the Black Lives Matter protest. The photograph in the bottom right are of the Baton Rouge police officers murdered in the line of duty in June of 2016. The picture on the top right is of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The picture on the bottom left is of Medgar Evers. The officers that died in 2016 were trying to protect people's rights. This can't be about us versus them. We have to do this work together. Please take some time and reflect on what you've just experienced. Thank you.